All right, ready to dive deep into Peronism today. We're going to see how it connects to modern political thought, especially some surprising stuff with Asian models.
It is going to be a fascinating discussion.
Yeah, we've got excerpts from articles and speeches about Peronist thought, and a lot of it focuses on comparisons to China.
Yeah, I think you'll find it pretty interesting, actually. Peronism is often misunderstood, especially in the West, but it actually shares a lot of the same core principles with some really successful and stable societies in Asia.
I'm ready for some surprises. Let's jump right in. Our sources talk about Peronism in Argentina today as kind of going through an identity crisis.
Yeah.
Seems like they're having trouble staying unified.
Yeah, they are. And it's a great place to start, I think. To really understand this, I think we have to go back to Juan Perón and his vision of comunidad organizada, that's organized community.
Right.
And this wasn't just about, social programs. This was a whole different way of thinking about what it means to participate in politics.
Yeah. Now, I've heard this term before, comunidad organizada, but honestly, it's always been a little vague to me. What did Perón actually mean by that?
So Perón believed that, just voting in elections every few years, that wasn't enough for people to really have power, real popular sovereignty. He saw Western liberal democracy, with all its emphasis on individual rights and competition, he felt that actually created division rather than unity.
Right.
A comunidad organizada, this was about citizens actually being able to shape their nation, working together toward common goals.
So it's almost like this constant collaboration between the people and the government instead of just these periodic elections.
Precisely, yeah. And this is where I think the Asian connection comes in because Perón's vision, it has some really interesting parallels with the way that some Asian societies, function, especially those that are influenced by Confucianism.
Okay, wait, hold on. Confucianism, that feels like a big jump.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's a major philosophy, but how does that actually relate to practical politics, let alone to Peronism in Argentina?
That's a great question. You hit on a really important point. Confucianism, it's not just some abstract philosophy. It's actually woven into the social and political fabric of many Asian nations. But before we even get to that point, the sources point out that there's actually a historical link between Peronism and, get this, Maoist China.
Wait, seriously, Perón and Mao? Now that is unexpected.
Yeah.
Wow.
They communicated directly, and in a 1965 letter to Mao, Perón actually expressed admiration for the path that China was on, and he acknowledged their shared goals of fighting against imperialism. For example, he wrote, "The nefarious action of imperialism with the complicity of the traitorous classes prevented us in 1955 from fulfilling the stage of the democratic revolution in order to prepare the working class for the full and subsequent realization of the socialist revolution."
So both Perón and Mao, they saw themselves as fighting against these outside forces, but they also believed in shaping their revolutions to fit their own countries. They weren't just interested in copying some generic model from somewhere else.
Exactly. Yeah, they rejected this whole idea of universal system, one-size-fits-all. Instead, they advocated for what Perón called national socialisms, kind of tailored to their own specific cultural and historical contexts.
Okay. I'm starting to see the thread here, but now I'm really curious about this whole thing with Mao and Confucianism. I mean, he was a Marxist revolutionary.
Right.
Didn't that kind of clash with traditional Chinese philosophy?
It's a really important point. Despite being a Marxist, Mao recognized, the power of Confucianism. He saw that it could be used to unite China and also to create social harmony. He understood that it was very important to appeal to these deeply rooted cultural values. And so this actually led to something called Neo-Confucianism kind of emerging as this guiding force in the Chinese Revolution.
So this Neo-Confucianism, it was kind of a blend.
Yeah.
Combining some Marxist ideas with those traditional Confucian values.
It was, yeah. It allowed Mao to kind of ground his revolution in something that felt familiar to most Chinese people, right? So it made it much more acceptable to them.
Okay, fascinating stuff. But let's bring it back to Peronism. What are these core Confucian principles, and how do they actually connect to what Perón was trying to do?
So Confucianism, it puts a lot of emphasis on social order, duty to the collective good rather than focusing on individual rights. Harmony, consensus building, the importance of family and virtue. Now, some of these ideas, they might sound a little controversial from a Western perspective.
Yeah, prioritizing the group over the individual, that's not exactly the American way, right?
Right.
But I'm guessing this kind of ties back into that comunidad organizada concept.
You got it. Both Peronism and Confucianism, they have this, in their own way, emphasis on social justice, a harmonious society, right? It's a different approach than what you see in the West, which often emphasizes individualism.
So they're both concerned with fairness, but it's more about everybody fulfilling their role in a well-functioning society rather than just focusing on individual rights and freedoms.
That's a great way to put it, yeah. It's a different way of thinking about equality, right? One that's not so focused on individual rights, but more on making sure that the whole community is doing well.
All right, so we've got this theoretical link between Peronism and these Asian models, especially Confucianism. But I need some examples. Did any countries actually put these ideas into practice successfully?
They did, and this is where things get really interesting. One of the best examples is Singapore. They have achieved incredible economic success and social stability, and they're very open about drawing inspiration from Confucian principles. In fact, they actually codified their national ideology as shared values, and it's directly rooted in Confucianism.
Wow, so they took these ancient ideas and made them into a modern political system. That's pretty remarkable.
It is, and it's not just Singapore. South Korea and Japan, they also have deep Confucian influences in their societies and in their politics. They put a huge amount of emphasis on education, hard work, and social cohesion. And this has been a major factor in their economic success and their stability.
Okay, now I'm starting to see how these Asian examples could be relevant to Peronism. But remember, we started by talking about Peronism struggling in Argentina today. Can these examples really offer them any practical solutions?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And that's what we're going to explore in our next segment. Welcome back. Last time we talked about some pretty surprising parallels between Peronism and Asian political models, especially those that have been influenced by Confucianism.
Yeah, those connections were definitely not what I was expecting when we started. But now I'm thinking, how can Peronism actually use these models to deal with the problems that Argentina faces today? It's not like they can just copy another country's system, right?
Oh, right. You can't just copy and paste. It's more about understanding those principles that have made these models successful and then maybe figuring out how to adapt them to Argentina.
Okay.
Remember Perón and Mao, they both talked about finding their own kind of national socialism, something that really resonated with their people and their history.
So what might an Argentine national socialism based on these Asian models actually look like? I mean, what specific things could they actually use?
Well, our sources point to a few key things. One is that strong emphasis on national unity and social harmony. That's really big in Confucianism.
Okay.
And if you think back to Perón's idea of comunidad organizada, it's not just about collective action, it's about really cultivating a sense of shared purpose.
But how do you build that shared sense of purpose in a country that's as diverse and politically divided as Argentina? It seems like every issue just pushes people further apart.
Well, that's where this idea of an acuerdo fundacional comes in. It means foundational agreement.
Okay.
Perón actually believed that this was really essential. It's about finding common ground, even if people disagree on specific policies.
I think we need to unpack this a little bit more. What would an agreement like that involve? And how could you even do that in a country that seems so divided?
Well, the sources give us some hints. First, it would mean moving beyond this grieta, the political polarization that divides Argentina.
Right.
It doesn't mean everyone has to agree on everything, but it means finding some common ground on those really fundamental values, right, and goals for the country.
I can already hear people saying that's never going to happen. How can you bridge that gap?
It would require a big change in the political culture, that's for sure, getting away from that winner-take-all mentality that we see in Western democracies.
Right.
It's about creating spaces for people to actually talk and work together. Not just political parties, but also regular people.
So are we talking about something like those organizaciones libres del pueblo that Perón talked about?
Yeah.
Bringing all sorts of different groups into the political process.
Exactly. He saw those organizations as a way to give different parts of society a real voice.
Okay.
Not just, top-down rule.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this national unity, this acuerdo fundacional, could lead to a more collaborative way of governing. But we can't just ignore Argentina's economic problems. How do these Asian models address those kinds of issues?
That's a really important point. What's interesting is that a lot of these Asian societies, like Singapore and South Korea, they've been incredibly successful economically, but they've also really focused on social harmony and collective good.
Right.
They show that you can have a dynamic economy without sacrificing stability.
But their economies are pretty different from Argentina's, aren't they? I mean, they're known for being export-driven and really
Yeah.
focused on technology.
Mhm.
Can Argentina really do that?
It's not about just copying their policies. It's about understanding the principles behind their success.
Hmm.
And some of those could really be relevant to Argentina.
Like, what are those principles?
One big one is thinking long term. These societies didn't just go for those quick wins. They actually invested in things like education, infrastructure, research, and development. Always with the future in mind.
Well, that sounds really different from what we usually see in Argentine politics. Everyone seems to just focus on the next election.
Yeah, it's a different way of thinking, for sure. Another big principle is pragmatism. Remember, Perón talked about the end of ideologies. He really believed in finding solutions that worked, no matter what you call them.
So forget the dogma and just focus on what gets results. I kind of like that.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
It's about focusing on solutions that help everybody, not just about scoring political points.
But, I do have a concern with all this emphasis on pragmatism and the collective good. Doesn't that risk pushing aside individual rights and social justice, especially for those who are already the most vulnerable?
That's a really valid concern, and that's where I think the core values of Peronism are so important. Social justice, economic independence, popular sovereignty. Those values can act as a safeguard. They make sure that any changes still align with the movement's goals of helping the people.
So it's like using those Peronist values as a guide, making sure that even as they adapt and learn from other places, they don't lose sight of those principles that define the movement.
Exactly. It's about finding that balance, Yeah.
Balancing pragmatism with those deeply held values, making sure that any changes actually benefit everyone.
Okay, I can see how this could be really helpful for Peronism, but it seems like a huge undertaking. How do you actually make it happen? How do you go from these ideas to actually governing a complex country?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah.
How do you move from thinking about something to actually doing it? And that brings us to what might be the most important thing of all, leadership.
Leadership. That magic ingredient that can either make or break a movement. What kind of leadership does Peronism need to make all of this work?
Perón actually talked about this. He said that leaders need to be able to articulate a vision, but they also need to inspire people
Okay.
to actually achieve that vision. It's not just about having a good plan. You need someone who can really bring people together and overcome all the obstacles.
So it's not enough to just have a brilliant idea. You also need the charisma and the political skills to get people on board and then actually put it into action. That's it, exactly. And it takes someone who really understands the Argentine people, what they want, what frustrates them, what they hope for.
So we're talking about someone who can bridge that gap between Peronism's history and the demands of today's world. Someone who can inspire trust, build consensus, and make those tough calls when they need to. That's a lot to ask.
Yeah, it is. But as we've seen in this deep dive, Peronism has never been afraid of big challenges.
Okay, I'm with you on this. This is an important conversation to be having, but I still feel like we're missing something. We've talked about the principles, the models, the leadership, but where's the actual plan? What can Peronism really do to move in this direction? How do they go from these big ideas to a concrete plan of action?
That's the million-dollar question, right? How do we go from wanting something to actually making it happen? And that's exactly what we're going to dig into in our final part.
Okay, we're back and ready to wrap up our deep dive into Peronism. It's been a fascinating journey, especially those connections to Asian political models. I got to admit, I'm eager to see how we can tie it all together.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride, hasn't it? We started with those core Peronist ideas, then looked at Confucianism and how it's working in places like Singapore. Now the big question is, can all this actually help Peronism in Argentina today? Can it give them a roadmap?
Exactly. We've seen some intriguing stuff, but now I need to see what they can actually do. How do they take all these ideas and actually put them into action?
Well, our sources suggest they need a multi-pronged approach. And they need to start by bringing back that idea of comunidad organizada. It can't just be a slogan. It's got to be about giving people the power to shape their country.
So we're talking about more than just voting every few years. It's about being more engaged, more involved in democracy, right? But how do you actually make that happen? Where do you even begin?
Perón himself tried a few different things. He tried bringing in different social groups, letting them participate through organizations like the Organizaciones Libres del Pueblo. That could be a starting point, I think.
Right, but those efforts had problems, did they? Like those Peritarias Ampliadas where labor and business clashed. How do you get past that kind of resistance and actually build consensus?
Yeah, that's where the idea of an acuerdo fundacional, that foundational agreement, becomes so crucial. Finding those core values, those goals that everyone can agree on, even if they disagree on the specifics.
We've talked about this Acuerdo quite a bit, but I'm still not sure how you get everyone to sign on. Especially in a country as politically divided as Argentina. Every issue just turns into a fight.
Oh, it definitely requires a big shift. We have to move away from this winner-takes-all idea that dominates politics almost everywhere, not just in Argentina. We have to start recognizing that a nation can only really thrive when everyone feels like they're part of its success.
Okay, but how do you find that common ground?
Mm.
Singapore, they managed to create those shared values. Those were based on Confucian principles. But those values were chosen by the ruling party. How could you have a genuine national conversation in Argentina, one that really includes everybody?
That's the challenge, and also the opportunity, I think. Peronism, they have these deep roots in Argentine society. They could be the ones to kickstart this process. They could start a national dialogue, a conversation about what it means to be Argentine in the 21st century.
I like that idea. It's Peronism starting a conversation that goes beyond party lines, beyond all the bickering and fighting. But this dialogue can't just be for politicians.
No, absolutely not. It has to involve everybody, the unions, the business groups, neighborhood groups, cultural institutions, everyone. A real comunidad organizada, shaping its own future.
That's a powerful vision. I can really get behind that. But let's not forget about the economic side of things. We talked about those Asian models,
Yeah.
how they managed to have both prosperity and harmony. So how can Peronism learn from that? What concrete steps can they take in Argentina?
The key takeaway here is that long-term vision, focusing on being pragmatic and getting results. It's time to stop with the short-term political games and think strategically about how to develop the economy over the long haul.
So it's less about winning the next election and more about building something that will last. Investing in education, infrastructure, technology, creating an economy that's sustainable and benefits everyone.
Exactly. It's about making choices that benefit the entire country, not just a select few. It's about thinking about how those choices will play out over years and decades, not just months.
All of this sounds great, but let's be honest here. We've seen plenty of well-intentioned plans fail in Argentina. What makes this time different? Why should anyone believe things will actually change?
You see, I think this is different because of Peronism's unique position, its history. They have that deep connection with the working class, a commitment to social justice, and they've proven they can mobilize people. This isn't just about new policies, it's about Peronism channeling its energy and passion towards something truly